Starting now. So in this video we're going to continue on from where we left off with our animated sprites. We're going to start introducing more useful features such as colliders and rigid bodies. So first things first, I'm going to clean up my scene just a little bit here. So I'm going to delete all these objects out of here. Keep one of those animated guys in here. So I have my white texture and my animated texture. So let me just click on play here. Bingo. So I'm going to move these guys up the top. And I'm going to save that. So let's modify this. I want to introduce a new component called a collider. So I'm going to click on Add Component. And we're going to see our options down here. We're going to see Physics 2D. And we are going to see these guys called colliders. So we have Box Collider, Capsule Collider, Circle Collider, Edge Collider, and a few other ones down here then as well. Polygon Collider is an interesting one for us later on. So we are going to pick a Box Collider here. A Box Collider 2D, I should say. So what's going to have happened here is, firstly, if I zoom in, there'll be a little green box showing up around our sprite now. And what this collider is doing for us is it is defining the physical bounds of this object in Unity, in our two-dimensional game. So let's zoom in a little bit. And of course, we get the tooltip, so we'll do it again. So here is my box collider component. We can see our sprite guy that we had been using previously is just up there. My add components moves down here now, so we can continuously keep adding components to these guys. A few little interesting bits that we want to see here. We can edit the shape of this collider if we want. So if you're not happy with the exact size of it, you can come in here and we'll see that in a minute. We can change all of those. We have an interesting guy here called a physics material, which is going to allow us to change, say, the properties of the surface of this object. We'll see it when we get to the rigid bodies. We have triggers. So the interesting thing about a collider, if it represents the physical bounds of an object, sometimes in video games we'd like to be able to pass through those objects without the player ever knowing. So we want to have, say, an invisible volume that if we pass through, we can spawn loads of enemies to come in. So you're walking in a spooky hallway, invisible volume, tells a piece of code, spawn in 10 zombies, those zombies then know to come after you, that kind of stuff. So if we have is trigger set to true, we can make it pass through the player. It'll still tell us though if the player has hit it or if any object has hit it. So a really cool thing about colliders is these events that they're able to kind of provide us with. The ability to know if it has touched another object and if it has stopped touching an object. And we'll see that later when we get to the scripting. We want to skip most of this stuff here. We have an offset and we have a size that we can change then as well. If you want to move the position of it to be a little bit, maybe it's off, but for some reason, you can change it here very, very easily. So let's get around to messing around with this guy. So if I select my edit collider, I can change the shape of this guy. It's going to be very, very hard to see there, but there's a little green icon, a little green line showing up that's letting me move it. It could be kind of useless for us starting off right now. But just know you can change that shape. We'll do it again maybe when we get to the polygon one a little bit later on. So that's our collider done. For that guy, we're going to do the exact same on this one over here then as well. So we'll notice the one difference between that guy is it still is a sprite renderer. I want to take note. Remember, we're using our animations here. It does have an animator component here. Now we're going to come back to this later. I did mention, remember, we had one file that was actually controlling what was being played, and then how that was actually, deciding what needs to be played. We said we'd see it with our enemies later. Well, that's the guy here. Okay, so it's saying, hey, this is the brains of the operation. This is telling me what animation I'm supposed to play. And the only difference is it's just playing back the frames that we had set up earlier. So I'm going to do my add component here though. And if you don't go to all the way to Physics TD, you can actually just type in box and we'll see your box collider pop up. Remember, 2D. So you can see there was a box collider that showed up as well. That was for 3D stuff. That won't work for us, so we have to keep everything as 2D. So we've got our physical bounds on these objects. We would think something might happen when we click on play here. And we would see that it looks the exact same. as we had before. So while the colliders define the edges and the limits of an object, they do nothing to kind of simulate that object in a physical sense. They don't have mass, there's no friction applied to it, there's no gravity been applied to these objects. To do that, we need another component that goes hand in hand with this box collider guy. So I have my white guy selected here. I'm going to click Add Component. It's actually going to be my Physics 2D again here, and it's a guy called be a RigidBody 2D. So you have the option, remember, going Physics 2D and then finding it, or we can just put in RIG, and I can see my RigidBody 2D. So I'm going to add that on, and before I do any sort of talking about it, I'm just going to click play. And we can see our object has now fallen off the screen. So what has changed here? What did that component add to this object? Well, we have a body type, so just to start off moving, it's a static object that you can't kind of push through. So it's like infinite mass kind of stuff. You get to pick that from here. We're interested in dynamic ones, really, though, starting off for us. You have it simulated, whether or not it's actually doing what it's supposed to do, which is what's its mass, what kind of drags apply to it, what's its gravity scale, so how much does gravity kind of affect it. There is like a gravity amount that you can kind of set then as well. We've our different collision detection modes in here. We're not going to worry too much about these starting off. We do have a constraint section that we might take a look at a little bit later on, and that's basically going to say, hey, well, this object can't move on a certain axis or in a certain direction and that kind of stuff. And we also have our physics material popping back up here. So the exact same as what we have with our box collider, which is something that we're going to be taking a look at now in a couple of seconds. So mass is important here, just for wrap up and I'll zoom back out of here. Our mass is very, very important. So this is the amount of stuff that our object is made up of. It's not the weight of the object, it's just how much of the object there actually is. So the bigger the mass is, the more it would take to push that object around, and obviously the less it is, the less effect it would have if we were to kind of shoot it at something. So if you think about a bullet might have a very, very small mass. So if you shoot it at like a big tank, the tank doesn't go flying off in the distance. You can set it to do that if you like. You can just increase the mass to be something pretty big, but realistically, it would hit it, and we wouldn't really get much of an effect of it. So let's continue on with this. So as we've seen, I've just left everything as the default, so it's just going to fall right back down. If I come in and I change my gravity scale to 0, you can see the object doesn't move at all. And if I set my gravity scale, say to be minus 0.5, it's going to start to move up. So our gravity, pretty important to mess around with. We're going to have a bit of fun with that maybe later. Now the same with this guy here. I can put a rigid body on that if I like, and it will also behave in the exact same way. Now there is like an auto mass kind of set down here. We can see that it's now setting that up for me. So if you'd expect this guy to fall or have a bigger mass because it is a bigger object, well, we can set that up to happen. Okay, 5.9. So I'm actually going to remove that component. So just to know, if you don't like the way something is working, or if you don't need it, basically, we can take it away. We can get rid of it. You can also disable them, but for here, we're just going to right click and go remove components. So now this guy isn't going to fall for me. But I am going to mess around a little bit with this sprite here. So I am going to take my white sprite from the bottom and I'm going to drag it in. And I'm going to scale it up just to fill this space here. I'm then going to add a collider to it, box collider 2D. And that's it. So it's going to be at the ground. So I'm going to hit play. And boom. No rigid body attached to it, but it does have a physical bounce. So when the collider in conjunction with the rigid body of the smaller white box falls down, it collides and it's physically stopped. It can't pass through it. All built in, all done for us, no problem. Of course, it would work for the big guy over here then as well if we had that enabled for it. So one kind of option that we had seen earlier was physics material. That was kind of popping up here. And it's a nice little feature in Unity. So I'm going to right click and we're going to see our create menu for the first time. And this is basically a key bit in Unity. If we right click in our assets down here, we have a create menu where we get to create pretty much everything you can put in a Unity game directly in here. Ones that we are going to be interested in though is folder, scripts, scene. You might look at material, sprites and that kind of stuff, and I think that's probably it. So we're going to get great loads of stuff out of here basically. One that I want to do is physics material. I'm going to see it down here, physics material 2D. So I'm going to call it bouncy. So what I want to have happen here is that when an object collides with this bottom bit, this ground bit, I want it to bounce right back up. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign it onto this ground. Right into the box collider of my ground, I have bouncy set as the material. Okay, so you can see it right here, bouncy. So I will select the material and we'll see what we're going to get here. Two key bits, friction and bounciness. So when an object hits this surface, what's the friction that's going to be applied to it, and what is the bounciness of this surface going to be? So one really cool thing we want to do here is we're going to set our bounciness to be 1, and we're just going to test this out. And it'll continue running, and we can actually select our object here as it's moving. And of course, I think because it's Unity, we should be able to manipulate this a little bit. Oh. No, it didn't pick up on that, unfortunately. Okay, yeah, so what was it with 1? 1 will continuously keep on bouncing, and then with 0, it kind of stops completely. So one thing I want to try out then here as well, and I drag in another white one, I am going to scale it, and then I'm also going to rotate it a little bit. So I want to see if we drop an object with the bouncy material onto an angled surface, we'll bounce it over. Aha. Yeah, perfect. So you can actually set it for it to be like automatically moving around. So Control D, duplicate, and then I can like rotate it a little bit more. Perfect. So we can maybe mess around a little bit with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ball or a sphere for us to use. So in paint.net, I'm just going to create a new image. I would say it's going to be 128 by 128. I'm going to delete everything there, so I Control A this, and I'm going to go to my elliptical selection tool. So it's going to be very hard to see here because of the transparent background on that, but I'm going to hold the Shift key while I left click, and that's going to give me a circle that's basically the same radius all over. So I'm going to fill this in. So paint bucket, and I suppose I'll leave it as white. So I just right clicked because that is the secondary color that's selected. Now there's a lot of empty space here and that kind of stuff, so I want to clean this up just a little bit. So I'm going to use that magic wand tool on the right here. I'm going to click onto an empty spot, and it's going to fill it all up like that for me. I'm going to hit Control I. It's going to invert the selection. I'm then going to copy this, hit a new document with Control N. I'm then going to go Control A to select everything and Control V to paste in just that exact circle. I can then resize this to be 128 by 128 perfectly. So I get a sphere that is perfectly 128 by 128. There's probably a quicker way to do it, but I'm going to call it ball. Make sure to save as a PNG, and we're done. I can close that. So we'll import it in. And we are going to change, well, we could change the settings of this guy. So if I want to just change the sprite for him, I can. I can come down and I can pick ball, and it'll update. And now we can see the outline for the collider. So you'd actually have to go in, take out your box collider, get rid of it, all that kind of stuff. So we're not going to bother. We're going to leave that the way it was. I'm going to move it over here, and I'm actually going to turn it off. So right up the top here, I mentioned it way back at the beginning, and this is how we're going to actually disable this object. So I'm going to check it, and we can see now it's disappeared. So I'm going to put my ball in. It's probably a little too big, so we can scale it down. I'm then going to add in my circle collider. So this is another collider that we didn't use the ball last, and this is the circle. So match perfectly onto my ball, and we'll add the rigid body. We'll give it a go, see what happens. Cool. So I'm going to play around with the friction here. Excellent. So after that fun little detour and experiment using the physics material with the rigid bodies and our different shapes, why don't you have a go? See, can you set up some sort of actual environment or level where that ball can bounce around, or any objects? See how many you can do. For instance, you can just duplicate whatever you like here. I can hit Control D. That'll duplicate an object for me in Unity. I can put in a few of these guys if I like. You can change the shape of these. You can make them bigger, make them smaller, whatever you like. I can move this guy out of the way, or actually, I can give him a rigid body like everybody else. We'll put on that auto mass. And we'll go. So yeah, go create something, see what you can kind of come up with, see what kind of interesting results you can kind of get out of it then as well. So when we come back, we're going to actually interact with these objects when they collide with stuff then as well.